Hi everybody, this is Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the September 2024 Shimmerz Color Kitz Collection. So clearly this is a bit of an older video. I made this layout back in September along with a few other layouts that I made using the same kit, and I just never got a chance to edit this video and voice it over. It kind of got lost in my iMovie library, but lately I have been working very hard to get all of those videos that I have not completed finished and up on my channel, and that way I can start fresh with the May videos that I'm going to be working on very soon. As soon as I saw this paper, I knew that I wanted to use the Shimmerz paints to color it in. I really do enjoy the process of using my paints and adding them to these beautiful pattern papers. I know I've mentioned this in the past, but there's a certain finish to the Shimmerz pattern papers that makes them take the paint so well. There's almost like a shiny coating on them. It's very light, but it's just enough that it makes the papers take the paint so much better than if it was just a regular piece of pattern paper. And then another thing that I love about these flowers is that they're on a large scale. I really like working with big elements on pages. I don't mind smaller ones too, but I do find that I'm drawn to larger ones. So I am painting this large flower in using, right now, two different colors. I'm using a creamies called Red Necking and a Shimmerz called Limoncello. And I hope if you watch my videos regularly, I don't sound like a broken record, but one of the important things for me when I'm painting anything in is to have some variation in the application of the paint. I don't want it to look flat. I want there to be light areas and dark areas. So I'm trying, and of course, none of this has to be perfect because it's not a real flower, but I want to kind of mirror the way that a real flower would look as far as the darks and lights. So I know that the area in the center of the flower is going to be a little bit darker than the outside areas of the petals. And then within each of the petals, there are some lines. So I thought that I would use those to add a little bit more variation. So I'm making some a little darker, some a little lighter. And then the areas that look like they would be the bottom layers of the flower, I'm making the edges of those a little bit darker too, just to try to mimic the shadow that would probably be there. And I'm definitely not an expert in painting flowers. I'm just sharing my thought process with you. I do think that if you haven't painted a lot of flowers before, it is helpful to have a photo of a flower in front of you or a few photos of flowers so that you can kind of get the idea of which areas are a little lighter and which ones are a little bit darker. And I'm using a small flat paintbrush for this. It was probably the only paintbrush that I could find. I generally tend to misplace my paintbrushes, especially these smaller ones. Whenever I'm trying to find one, I always find it a little bit challenging because I use them so often and in different parts of the house. So this paintbrush is nothing special. It's an inexpensive synthetic paintbrush, and I feel like you can get good effects as long as you have a paintbrush that's small enough and you take some time to build up layers of color. In the interest of not having an extremely long video, I'm not going to include footage of me painting in all of these flowers and leaves, but I do also use the new color for September, which is Mysterious Green. That's a Vibes, and I use the green to paint in the leaves that you see on this piece of pattern paper. And then after I have everything painted, I wait for the paper to dry thoroughly before I attempt to cut the flowers and the leaves out. Otherwise, it could be a bit of a disaster. And I know that from experience. There was one time that I tried to cut some images that I painted out very shortly after I finished painting them, and the result wasn't so great. So now I know to make sure that the paper is completely dry before attempting to cut anything out. And here you could see that I am going over some of the areas that I already painted that are already dry because I want to add a little bit more depth of color in a few areas. I also left some areas along the edges of the petals almost white, not quite white, but on the whiter side, and I think that makes the flower petals look like they're a little bit bent. I don't know, that was what I was trying to do anyway. So I fussy cut out all of those flowers and leaves, and I will show you how all of those came out in a moment. So things change a little bit as the layout process progresses, but I started off with this piece of pattern paper with the blue on the top and the bottom, and my plan is to cover this circle that I cut out with some strips of the pattern paper from the collection. This is the third layout that I made using this kit, so I have several pieces of paper that I've already cut into, and that's what I'm making use of here. And then I use some Distress Oxide to ink the edges of all of these strips of paper. Right now I'm using Victorian Velvet. I'm not inking the ends because I know that those are going to get cut anyway. I'm going to have to put a little bit more ink along the edges after I cut them. So after I'm all done with inking all of the strips, I begin to apply them to this circle. I put some adhesive down in a small area, and now I'm placing the strips on top of that adhesive. I don't want to go too crazy with putting adhesive all over the entire circle because of course my hand would get stuck in it, or fuzz, or other things that I don't want in the adhesive. So I work in not super small sections, but I'm not trying to cover the entire circle with the adhesive all at once. And even though I'm trying to spread out the colors across the circle, I am not following a specific pattern. So I don't have like yellow, pink, red, yellow, pink, red. I kind of mix it up a little bit, not a ton. But my idea was not to have it just keep repeating itself. I don't know if that'll make a big difference in the final product, but that's what I was looking for. And then I use my scissors and I cut all of the excess off, and now I'm flipping my circle around and I'm going to complete the circle doing the same thing again. So I continued adding the strips to the circle until the whole thing was covered up. And then I noticed I didn't have a strip that was quite wide enough to cover the whole rest of the circle. So I put a little bit of a strip on the very edge so that when I cut out the circle, there would be a little something on that very small edge. If that a little tiny area at the end of the circle, does that make sense? The end of the circle, if it was visible, I'm sure that it wouldn't be too noticeable, but I just wanted it to have a little bit of pattern paper on it rather than it being white. And once again, I'm using the Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide, and I'm going around the entire circle so that everything is inked. To cut out that first circle, I used my Creative Memories circle cutter. This is an old tool that I still use all the time. And then I also cut another circle that was just a little bit larger, so there would be a little bit of a border all the way around the circle. And I decided that instead of leaving it white, I would paint it blue, because initially I thought that the background was going to be just a solid white and the white wouldn't be too noticeable, so I thought I would add some blue, and the blue color that I'm using is called In Deep, and that's a coloring. And I went over the blue color with the paint several times just to build up the color so that the color around the edge of the circle would be as deep as the color at the top and the bottom of the pattern paper. While I was waiting for the paint to dry, I thought I would work on my photos. I have some photos that we took when we made a trip to Lancaster, Pennsylvania quite a few years ago. And we went to a small town nearby. I think it's called Lidditz. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And they had some kind of a water feature in the center of the town. And there were ducks swimming in it. And it was just really, really cool. So I had 3 pictures. For some reason, I thought that there were too many photos, and I ended up just using 2 photos. But now that I'm looking at it, I kind of like the way it looks with the 3 photos. But this happens to me all the time when I'm editing my videos. I see something that I changed and I think, why did I change that? It didn't look so bad. But there's something about looking at a photo or a video of a layout, and it kind of makes everything clear. So sometimes I will take photos of my layouts before I complete them, just to kind of help me spot any trouble areas. For some reason, taking a picture is helpful. Unfortunately, I didn't see this video until it was all done, but you will see that I end up just including the 2 pictures that are on the left-hand side. And before I even attach the photos down, I'm attaching down those flowers that I painted. You can see that I have them fussy cut out along with the leaves. And I love the way the leaves look with these flowers, especially that big one on the bottom. Like I said, I like the big elements. And then I also wanted to add in some other items that I had fussy cut. I tried these flowers and I just decided that I didn't really like the red flowers. They were so deep and dark, and I think they kind of took away from the flowers that I painted. So I don't end up using these red flowers that I'm adding now, but I do use these small berry clusters. There's one at the top and one at the bottom cluster, and those were part of the color and cut apart sheets that come in many of the Shimmerz Color Kitz collections, and I love painting in those sheets. It gives you a whole extra page of ephemera to use on your layout. So the bees that you see in the layout, those were from that sheet, as were the mushrooms that are at the bottom. And right now I'm just trying a few things out on the layout. I do end up editing down some of the embellishments that you're seeing. So I still haven't decided if I'm using 2 or 3 photos, and I just realized that I used the photo that was in the middle and the one that's on the right. The picture of the baby ducks was very, very cute, but I really wanted to have a photo of the mother duck with her little baby, and also I liked the way the water looked in that photo, so I chose the photo of the duck and the photo of Julia, and I decided to get rid of that 3rd photo, and then I mounted it on a piece of red cardstock that was in my stash. Years ago, when the kids were little, we used to go to the Creating Keepsakes scrapbooking convention in Lancaster every year, and the kids were young then, so they couldn't be left alone, so of course we brought them with us, and then we kind of made the weekend into a little vacation. So it always started out with the convention, and while we were doing that, the kids would paint some ceramics, and then afterwards we would explore the area, and this was one of those times. And I would really love to go back to this little town. Not only do they have this cool area where they had an art show one of the days we were there, but they also had a lot of really cool shops, and I remember it just being a really fun day there, so I would like to go back there again. But now, of course, my children are adults, so they don't come with us anymore. Now I still go to the same scrapbooking convention in Lancaster every single year, but my husband and I just drive out in the morning and then we drive home afterwards. It's only about 2 hours away, so that's become our new tradition. But I do miss spending the weekend in Pennsylvania with my family. We always had a really good time. So now I'm adding some photo corners to just the outside corners of both of those photos. I used some pink paper for that, and I inked the edges with some Victorian velvet Distress Oxide, the same color that I used to ink the strips. And then I added some matte blue enamel dots that I had in my stash to 3 of the photo corners. You can't really see that 4th corner, but I thought that it would be a good idea to bring some blue close to the photos to tie them in with the rest of the blue on the layout. Sometimes when I want to use stickers, I will stick them down to a piece of cardstock and then fussy cut them out, just because I am not sure exactly where I want to put them, so I like the idea of being able to move them around the layout until I decide exactly where I want them to go. Now I added a little laundry line up in the upper right-hand corner. I don't end up leaving that there, and I don't end up using this blue strip on the layout after all, but I do use these 2 hearts. I like the way the hearts are 2 different sizes, so I do end up putting them on the layout, but they don't end up where I have them. I had a lot of indecision on this layout, but that's not something that is totally foreign to me, but I think it was particularly notable on this layout that I made a lot of changes and really couldn't make up my mind about things. I fussy cut out some really, really teeny tiny little red flowers, and I decided to add them to that cluster at the bottom that has the mushrooms, and then I also added in a flower, and I like the color of that flower. I think it's very close to the color that I painted the flowers, the large flowers. And then I used a couple of really small self-adhesive pearls that I had in my stash. And this is when I decided that I was going to remove all of those darker red flowers. I don't remove the teeny tiny ones and the bottom cluster, but I just didn't like the way those flowers looked with the larger flowers. So I removed all of those, and then I also moved those hearts to the center of my 2 photos. So then I wasn't really feeling thrilled with this layout. There was just something missing. So I decided that I was, instead of having a white background, going to use this really pretty piece of yellow and white pattern paper. And I like the way the pattern is very subtle. It's a little more busy than what I'm used to, but I think that it works because the pattern is so subtle. I still wanted to use those blue pieces though that are at the top and the bottom of the original pattern paper that I had picked out. So I just tore them right off of the paper, and I left that small little cluster that I had in the lower left-hand corner where it was. I'm just gonna have to kind of patch that leaf back in again, or that branch back in again. And then after I tore them out, I added some ATG adhesive and I attached them down to the bottom and the top of my page. And I was surprised, but it was actually relatively painless to make this switch. And I think that that background looks a little bit more interesting than the white background that I had before. Maybe if I had added some mixed media to the background, it would have done the trick, but I decided to go this route, and I'm really happy that this pattern paper was included in the kit because I think that it just happened to go really well. And then I wanted to add a title to my layout, so I decided to call the layout Feelin Ducky. And so I used some letters that I had in my stash. I think these are thickers, but I'm honestly not 100% sure. But I picked them out because I thought that the size was great for this layout, and I also thought the color matched really well too. So I feel like I got lucky that I happened to have these in my stash. But of course, if I didn't have this color, I always could have die cut some letters and then use my Shimmerz paints to make them match perfectly. So I wanted to distress the pieces of paper at the top and the bottom just a little bit. So I use my fingers to bend them back, and I think that this adds a nice little touch to the layout. The Y in the word ducky looks like it's going to fall off. So later on, I tucked that underneath the circle, and that looked a little bit better. Don't forget, when you place an order with Shimmerz Paints, use my name in the comments and you'll receive a free gift. The September kit is no longer available. However, if you take a look on the Shimmerz website, you'll find lots of beautiful kits. The May kit is really beautiful, and there's a link in the description box to the Shimmerz shop. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch it. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again on my channel soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.